If you ask most people whether they should pay off their mortgage or invest instead, they answer the wrong question first. They ask which option is mathematically superior. That sounds intelligent, it sounds disciplined, it sounds like the kind of framing serious people should use. And yet, the longer I have watched households build wealth, hold wealth, and sometimes quietly sabotage wealth, the more convinced I become that this question is never just about mathematics. It is about mathematics, yes, but it is also about time. It is about taxes. It is about volatility. It is about how much fragility your life can tolerate. And for many people, though they are embarrassed to admit it in a culture that worships optimization, it is also about control. That is why this debate produces such strong opinions. One person hears the word mortgage and thinks cheap fixed rate leverage. Another hears the same word and thinks monthly obligation. One sees opportunity cost. Another sees sleep. One wants the highest expected long-term outcome. Another wants the strongest balance sheet when the world misbehaves. Both may be looking at the exact same rate. They are simply trying to solve for different kinds of safety. That is what makes this decision more interesting than the average spreadsheet admits. Because spreadsheets are very good at comparing percentages, they are much less good at comparing fragility. And fragility is what often decides whether a financial plan survives real life. So before I say anything else, I want to establish the right framework. The real question is not which number is bigger. The real question is, what does this mortgage do to the durability of my financial life? And what am I giving up to remove it? That is a much better question, because a mortgage is not just debt. It is a fixed claim on future cash flow. And future cash flow is what your whole life sits on. Now, if that claim is cheap enough, manageable enough, and long enough, it may be perfectly sensible to leave it in place and let your extra capital go work elsewhere. If that claim is expensive enough, psychologically heavy enough, or timed poorly enough relative to retirement, then removing it can be one of the smartest things you will ever do. That is why I distrust slogans here. Always invest instead. Always pay off the house. Those are not serious ideas. They are comfort phrases for people who do not want to think beyond one sentence. I do not care for one sentence finance. Real financial life is built in trade-offs. Now let us start with the plainest layer, because the plainest layer is still important. If your mortgage rate is very low, especially something in the 2 to 4% range, the case for keeping the mortgage and investing instead is usually strong. Why? Because long-term productive assets have historically earned more than that over meaningful time horizons. Even after you allow for some tax drag and some uncertainty, there's often still a healthy spread between the cost of the debt and the expected long-term reward from investing. And there's another layer working quietly in your favor: inflation. People say the payment is fixed, and they are right, but they often fail to finish the thought. The payment is fixed while the world around it is not. Wages drift upward over time. Prices drift upward over time. The dollars with which you repay that mortgage become less powerful over time. So a very cheap fixed mortgage is not merely cheap. In real terms, it often becomes cheaper as the years pass. That is not a small point. It is one of the reasons I am reluctant to attack very low-rate debt for younger households with strong liquidity and long time horizons. The debt may not be helping you in some romantic sense, but it may not be hurting you enough to deserve first priority over building a capital base. That distinction matters. If I were looking at a family with a 3% mortgage, steady earning power, solid emergency reserves, and decades before retirement, I would almost never tell them to starve their investing life, just to eliminate that loan early. The compounding runway is too valuable, but people then take this truth and stretch it beyond where it deserves to go. They begin behaving as though all mortgages should be treated this way. Number, a 6.5% mortgage is not a 3% mortgage. A 58-year-old is not a 32-year-old. A household with deep reserves is not the same as one with very little cushion, and a person who feels no psychological burden from carrying debt is not the same as a person who feels every fixed monthly bill like a moral weight on his back. These things matter. That is why I say the mortgage decision changes character as the rate rises and as the household ages. Once the mortgage moves into the gray zone, roughly 4 to 6%, certainty starts disappearing. The spread between what you are guaranteed to save by prepaying the loan and what you might earn by investing after tax, after volatility, and over your real holding period becomes uncomfortably tight. That is where so many people get stuck. And when people get stuck, they often do something foolish. They pretend the decision is still obvious when it no longer is. One person says the market has always done more over time, so investing clearly wins. Maybe another says a guaranteed 5% return is incredible, so paying off the mortgage clearly wins. Also maybe the problem is that in the gray zone, the answer is no longer about the number alone. It is about what you are trying to optimize. If you invest instead of prepaying the mortgage, you are buying expected upside at the cost of uncertainty. If you pay down the mortgage instead of investing, you are buying certainty and simplicity at the cost of foregone expected upside. That is the trade. And if you do not name the trade honestly, you will resent the result later. Not because the result was wrong, because you never admitted what you were paying for. This becomes even more important once retirement gets closer. Retirement changes the personality of debt. A mortgage in your 30s can be an annoyance. A mortgage in retirement can become a design flaw. Not always, but often enough that people should pay much more attention. In accumulation years, a household still has a long recovery window. Income is hopefully rising. The portfolio has time to heal from volatility. A fixed payment may still be perfectly manageable near retirement, or in retirement, the equation shifts. Now the portfolio itself may be asked to support that fixed payment, and that is where sequence of returns risk becomes brutally important. A plan does not fail only because returns are poor. It fails because poor returns arrive while the household is simultaneously forced to pull cash out to meet fixed obligations. That is what makes a mortgage more dangerous later in life. It is not just debt, it is a standing withdrawal demand attached to your housing. Remove it and the plan becomes simpler. Keep it and the plan must feed it through good markets and bad ones alike. That is why, as people move through their 40s and 50s, the question often changes from, can I beat this rate? To, does carrying this debt make my future too brittle? That is a much better question. I think fragility is all underrated as all personal finance. People love to talk about return, much less about resilience. And yet resilience is what determines whether a perfectly respectable plan survives unpleasant reality. A mortgage at 6% or more is not just an interest rate, it is a fixed annual claim on your future life. If paying it off gives you a guaranteed return equal to that rate, that is already compelling. But the deeper value is not the percentage. The deeper value is the removal of pressure. The plan needs less from your portfolio. The household has more room to absorb shocks. Retirement becomes easier to sustain. That is why I am much more sympathetic to mortgage payoff near retirement than many younger, purely return-focused people are. They are still thinking in accumulation language. Retirement is a different country in that country. Simplicity is worth more. Now let us talk about taxes because people are far too casual here. When somebody says the market returns 7 to 10% over time, he is usually speaking in broad historical averages. Fine, but the only return that matters to your life is what you keep, and what you keep depends on account type, tax efficiency, turnover, dividend treatment, and your own tax bracket. A tax-efficient index portfolio in the right wrapper is one thing, a higher turnover taxable approach is another. A Roth account changes the after-tax picture again. All of that matters because when the spread between mortgage cost and investable return is small, tax drag can be the thing that quietly tips the result. A 3% mortgage against a tax-efficient long-term equity allocation is one conversation. A 5.5% mortgage against a modestly tax drag portfolio is another. When the spread narrows, certainty becomes more valuable. That is not ideology. It is simple arithmetic with realism layered on top, and then we must talk about optionality. This is where the debate becomes genuinely adult. Money invested is not merely money chasing return. It is also flexibility. Liquid capital can be redirected. It can be held. It can be invested further. It can rescue you in an emergency. It can seize opportunities. Money pushed permanently into principal becomes home equity. Home equity is real wealth. It is also less flexible wealth. That is why I do not like hearing people talk as though all excess dollars are morally supposed to go toward eliminating debt. That is too simple. A household with no liquidity and a paid down house can still become distressed. A household with moderate debt but strong reserves and strong investing capacity may be in a much stronger actual position. The balance matters. Now let me give you two cases because contrast helps. The first person is 35 years old. The second is 45. Each has a $400,000 mortgage at 6.5%. Each has an extra $500 a month available. At 35, time is still an enormous ally. That $500 steadily invested and left alone for decades has a serious chance to become something large. The mortgage is expensive enough to deserve respect, yes, but the compounding runway is still so valuable that I would be reluctant to starve the investing engine entirely just to kill the debt faster. That does not mean ignore the debt. It means do not sacrifice your most powerful compounding years in pursuit of total certainty. That is too expensive a purchase for many 35-year-olds. At 45, the tone changes not because investing stops mattering, because time starts changing value. Retirement is closer. Recovery windows are shorter. The plan begins needing more resilience. Now I am much more open to directing a larger share of extra dollars toward principal, not because the market suddenly became bad, because the burden of carrying a large fixed mortgage deeper into later life is more dangerous. That is why I think hybrid strategies are often the smartest answer in the gray zone. People behave as though wisdom requires choosing a tribe. It does not. A hybrid path often solves the real problem better than ideological purity. Invest some of the excess, prepay some of the principal, protect the compounding engine while still harvesting some guaranteed return and reducing future fixed costs. That is not indecisive. It is intelligent. It also lowers regret. And regret matters more than spreadsheet purists like to admit. If you go all in on paying off the mortgage and later feel you starved your portfolio during the most powerful compounding years of your life, you will resent the strategy. If you go all in on investing and later find yourself overexposed, stressed, and still dragging a large mortgage into retirement, you may resent that strategy too. The hybrid route often works because it is behaviorally sustainable, and behaviorally sustainable beats theoretically perfect but emotionally impossible almost every time. Now let me address peace of mind directly. Peace of mind is real. It is not some silly emotional footnote to be ignored because it cannot be modeled with precision. But peace of mind is also not free. If you pay off a very cheap mortgage for the sake of emotional relief, you may be buying that peace at a real opportunity cost. That does not make the purchase irrational. It simply means you should admit what you are buying. You are not maximizing expected return. You are maximizing felt control. That is a legitimate choice if it aligns with your values and circumstances. What I dislike is when people call that choice the mathematically optimal decision, when what they really mean is, I feel better this way. Those are different claims. Likewise, the person who keeps a low rate mortgage and invests aggressively is not automatically more rational. He may simply have a greater tolerance for uncertainty and a stronger preference for long-term capital growth. That is also fine. Again, the right answer is not universal, it is conditional. That is why I think there are really two broad modes here. One is growth optimized, the other is resilience optimized. A low-rate mortgage plus disciplined investing is usually the growth optimized path. A high-rate mortgage payoff, especially as retirement approaches, is often the resilience optimized path. Neither is morally superior. They are different forms of optimization, and once you know which one you are choosing, the whole conversation becomes cleaner. The problem is that people try to buy everything at once. They want maximum upside, maximum certainty, maximum liquidity, minimum regret. That is fantasy. Every dollar allocation buys one thing by giving up another. So buy the right thing for your stage of life. At 35, I usually want the person to respect compounding more. At 55, I usually want the person to respect fragility more. That is not an iron law. It is just the direction the logic often runs. And through all of it, I keep returning to the same sentence. Debt is not a math problem alone. It is a claim on future cash flow. That is why this subject feels emotional. That is why two people with identical rates can still make different decisions. One sees cheap leverage, the other sees a fixed obligation. Both are seeing something real. The only thing that matters is which reality is more important inside your life right now. If you answer that honestly, the mortgage debate becomes much less noisy. You stop trying to win some public argument and start building a private plan strong enough to survive your actual life. That is the only standard I care about, not whether you extracted every last dollar of theoretical expected value, whether the structure you chose leaves your life durable. So here is the clearest summary I know how to give. If your mortgage rate is very low and your time horizon is long, investing usually deserves the heavier weight. If your mortgage rate is high and retirement is closer, paying it off usually deserves much more respect. If you live in the middle, a hybrid strategy is often smarter than pretending one camp holds all truth. And if peace of mind is the deciding factor for you, say so honestly. Peace of mind is not irrational. It is simply something you are buying. Just make sure you know the price. That is all I ever ask of people in money. Know what you are buying, know what you are giving up, know which risk you are accepting. Then move forward without apology. That is how adults make mortgage decisions, not with slogans, with clarity, with structure, and with the humility to understand that the best answer is rarely the one that sounds smartest in public. It is the one that leaves your private life strongest over time.